and you are the father of this guy, Shirley Falcowski. And she wanted to visit with you about some things that we were about to start talking about. Okay.
Her father was present, there to observe the conversation about to unfold. 54-year-old Shirley Falcowski sat beside her father, George. For 4 years, Shirley had been a fugitive from a brutal homicide investigation, and George was about to discover his own daughter was a wanted murderer. But Shirley's history concealed far more than George could ever imagine. Everyone present would soon suspect the murder of 71-year-old James Earl Johnson was not her only secret. An investigator raised a chilling question about a death back in '98. She spoke of being hunted, expressing a strange desire to finally be caught. On August 5, 2015, police in Texas were summoned to a grim scene discovered by apartment staff. Inside lay the body of 71-year-old James Earl Johnson on his living room floor. The attack on James was savage, with far more than just 1 or 2 wounds. He had been stabbed a staggering 71 times, and investigators desperately needed a suspect. Soon after, detectives found footage of someone using the victim's card at a nearby ATM. The person on camera was 50-year-old Shirley Falcowski, a woman who called James a friend. Conveniently, she had an explanation. 1. She denied any knowledge of the murder, claiming James had simply loaned her his card and car. Armed with the surveillance footage, police had their lead. Yet 4 years passed until 2019, when Shirley voluntarily came in for another interrogation. The method for securing her willing cooperation was unconventional. Investigators had repeatedly contacted her father, urging him to persuade his daughter to talk. After months of pressure, he finally succeeded and drove her to the station himself. He was under the impression this would clear his daughter, whom he believed was innocent. But once the police read her rights, it became clear she was hiding something significant. The detective began the interview, attempting to clarify the situation. He acknowledged the significant time that had passed since their last discussion in 2015. He confirmed the door was shut for privacy and that she was not under arrest. She was explicitly told she could leave whenever she chose. The officer emphasized that her cooperation was not compelled. He noted her past willingness to help, despite a previous derogatory comment she had made. She had once promised to help them find out what happened to the victim. The stated purpose was to bring closure, first for the victim and second for his family. Law enforcement, he explained, was there to facilitate that closure for the grieving family. He proceeded carefully, aware of the emotional gravity of the discussion. She acknowledged the topic was emotional, linking it to her past struggles with drugs. The detective observed that she appeared to be in much better health. She credited her father's support through what had been a difficult time. Mentioning the victim, she claimed, was particularly painful because he was her best friend. Her circle of friends had dwindled, a fact the detective seemed to understand. She implied that leaving her old lifestyle behind had cost her friendships but brought inner clarity. The investigator then shifted focus, asking if she was clean from the harder drugs. She admitted to having indulged a few times, an honesty he appeared to appreciate. She claimed to be more truthful now than ever before, despite these recent relapses. There was a moment of hesitation. She recalled how bad her physical state had become during that period, but she insisted she never crossed the line into hurting anyone or stealing. Her professional life was in shambles, potential employers hesitant despite wanting her skills. The question hung in the air. Had this derailed her career? It appeared to have derailed her entire existence, a hard truth she acknowledged. She saw herself on a path of destruction, a force tearing her own family apart. At a point where she could finally speak on it, a crucial question arose from the investigators. They needed to understand the feeling, the psychological space she occupied while under the influence. For her, it was a profound sense of inner well-being, a simple remedy for a deep ailment. It was a way to mute the chronic pain in her body, a simple escape from physical reality. But she also admitted to chasing the high, a state where worldly concerns seemed to dissolve. Yet, she insisted she still cared deeply about many things. The investigator probed deeper, recalling what others had described about that state of mind. For many, the high was a temporary erasure of all pain and stress, a chemical reprieve from life's pressures. It was described as a mechanism for pure, unburdened relaxation. She confirmed this was her experience as well. She preferred to be alone, retreating into a private world where she felt safe and relaxed, unlike others who became erratic. The investigator understood the distinction. She was not a social user. She never felt comfortable around others, who she found dangerously unpredictable. She actively avoided the chaos and psychological instability she saw in other users. Shirley's history is a dark tapestry of addiction and violence, making her freedom a perplexing mystery. In 1998, during a heated argument in a vehicle, she stabbed her boyfriend repeatedly. She convinced the jury it was self-defense, that she had killed him because she feared for her own life. She accepted a plea bargain for second-degree murder, serving only 12 years for the crime. Released in 2010, she was free for just 5 years before she killed again. But in this room, she was determined to paint a picture of innocence for both killings. An investigator began to broach a subject they had not previously discussed, something her own father had mentioned. He raised the matter of her time in prison, a topic she had carefully avoided in their first conversation. It was a part of her life she claimed to have sealed away, for reasons she kept to herself. The memories, she alleged, were still too sharp, too painful to confront. She felt the official account of what happened simply didn't add up. The investigator asked if the relationship had been abusive, a question she flatly denied. That was the end of that line of inquiry. The detective circled back to the man whose life she had taken. He pressed forward carefully, needing to explore the past she had brought into the room with her. She noted that even her own father knew it was a topic she refused to discuss. She spoke of her actions with a sense of disbelief, as if she couldn't comprehend how she had snapped. Upon entering prison, the reality of her situation became unbearable for her. She couldn't process the fact that she had taken a human life. The weight of it was immense. The investigator clarified what he'd been told, that she had attacked someone with a knife, but the outcome was unclear. She confirmed a knife was involved, but claimed she had no memory of what transpired. Her memory of the event, she insisted, was a complete and total blank. The question was inevitable. Was she under the influence of narcotics at the time of the killing? She was evasive, stating she didn't believe she was, before her thoughts drifted back to her boyfriend. All she could say was that he had suddenly changed, for reasons she couldn't fathom. She recalled them sitting at a table, but the conversation itself is lost to her memory. Then, a single, sharp memory emerges from the fog. He struck her, sending her across the table. She confirmed he was a large man, but claimed the specifics of the encounter were a total blank in her mind. The only concrete image she could recall was rising and heading to the bedroom for her green card, a relic of her German citizenship. He took it from her. As he moved to strike her again, she fled the house, screaming, her primary concern being the recovery of her card. That document was essential, her very key to employment, her official identity. The story, she observed, often moved others to tears, even as she herself maintained a composed demeanor. It all began with that first assault, the moment the violence became physical. She spoke of being deeply, almost foolishly, in love, a vulnerability she seemed to hold in contempt. This pattern of leaving and returning continued, a cycle of abuse she repeatedly re-entered. But there was a final incident, a culmination that made her realize she could not continue. The loneliness of being single was a stark reality, a difficult trade for the chaos she had left behind. Despite this, she insisted she preferred solitude now, a preference that seemed entirely logical given her past. The investigator pressed for details. Did the attacks continue inside the home they shared? The questioning then shifted to the end. Was he at home on the night of his death? On that subject, she was resolute. It was a topic she refused to discuss, a door she would not open. The interviewer clarified that his questions were not based on assumption but on her prior statements about the domestic violence. He acknowledged her hesitation but gently steered the conversation back to the purpose of their meeting. Time was a factor. He noted a prearranged appointment for 11:29. The focus returned to the day she had been at Johnson's apartment, a timeline that required careful re-examination. He established that she was, in fact, present at the residence. Her visit was on August 4th, the day before authorities received the call that Johnson was deceased. She had previously stated that she went to Mr. Johnson's residence 2 separate times on that crucial day. The first visit occurred earlier in the day, followed by a second later that night. The investigator asked her to correct any inaccuracies in his recounting of her statement, seeking to solidify the facts. She quietly consented to this. She maintained that during both visits, she saw no one else there. The deceased had been alone with her. On that last visit, late in the evening, she found Mr. Johnson by himself. It was during this time, he confirmed, that she had consumed a beer. He always kept beer for her, she explained, even after he had reportedly stopped drinking himself. His abstinence from alcohol was a recent development, according to her account. In the past, their relationship had involved drinking, often beginning at her father's house before they returned to town. That period was defined by his drinking, a fact she recalled clearly. By the time of his death, however, circumstances had changed. He had reportedly quit drinking, secured an apartment, and was attempting to stabilize his life. Yet on the night of the 4th, she returned to his apartment with a specific need. She admitted her purpose was to borrow $5 to buy more beer from a bootlegger. It was a difficult truth, but she confirmed the detail was accurate. Initially, however, she claimed to have forgotten this particular reason for her visit. She stated that her memory of that night was now fragmented and unreliable. What she did remember was being there, sitting with him at his kitchen table, and sharing an embrace. He gave her his bank card to get money. The next thing she knew, a call from her sister delivered the news. Piggy was dead. Her immediate reaction was one of stunned disbelief. She had just seen him the night before. The deceased's nickname was Piggy, a detail clarified for the record. The reference to a friend was a point of confusion. She was actually speaking of a Mr. Young. She confirmed his first name was Jerry. Beyond these fractured details, she claimed her memory failed her. That was all she had to say. She maintained he fell and hit his head, that he had hurt himself, and that was the end of it. It was, she claimed, the only truth she knew. She was confronted with a statement made to a relative that she was present at his house. She clarified that she hadn't told her sister that, only that she had been there that night. He couldn't be deceased, she insisted, because he was perfectly fine when she left him. That was her story, the absolute boundary of her knowledge on the matter. About anything else surrounding the event, she professed a complete and total lack of awareness. The account Shirley provided to investigators aligned with her original statement, yet a glaring problem remained. It defied logic. In her version, she used her boyfriend's vehicle to visit James and borrow some money. He gave her his card, she went to an ATM, returned the card, and left him perfectly healthy. It was a story that immediately raised suspicion. The narrative crumbled under the weight of evidence. James's blood DNA was found in the car she claimed he had never once entered. Then, another disturbing element surfaced. After James's murder, Shirley gave cash to a friend. The money was visibly stained with blood, a fact her friend noted. Shirley's response was a disturbingly simple lie. She told her it was ketchup. The investigator focused on the amount of money. He instructed her to take out $10 or $20, she confirmed. 10 or 20. This was true, even though she had only intended to borrow $5 from him. She depicted herself as someone who never disrespected him, always complying with his wishes. It was just how things were between them, every single time. When asked about any history of arguments with Mr. Johnson, she flatly denied any such conflicts. The only irritation she would admit to was when his drinking led to moments of indignity. She recounted this detail with a strange, almost comical detachment that caught the investigator off guard. She recalled their back and forth about his inebriation with an odd sense of familiarity. Still, she insisted he was a good man, someone who was quite sweet on her. She described him as a normal, nice person, a man that everybody in the community loved. He was, by her account, a good guy. The questions then turned to their physical relationship. Asked to be honest about how often she hugged him, she replied without hesitation, all the time. She would sit close to him, she explained, during their time together. She described his body clinically, noting his legs were bony and that he was remarkably fragile. She detailed their routine, a simple hug, and then they would sit across from each other to play cards. These games took place at the table in his kitchen. In another home, she would sit next to him on the sofa, but that was the extent of it. Every time she saw him, she claimed, she offered a hug and a kiss. He buttered her up, she said, but she asserted her own feelings in the dynamic were real. She understood that everyone perceived them as a couple, an image she was aware of. It was a public narrative she allowed to continue without correction. The detective confirmed this perception. On the streets, they were seen as being together. She did not dispute this. Despite this public image, she had told others they were not involved. In the privacy of the interrogation, however, she finally admitted to occasional intimacy. This was a confession she was willing to make to him, to clarify what had happened. To anyone else, however, she maintained a wall of privacy, feeling it was nobody's business. The detective then steered the questioning to the specific night of the 4th. She denied any intimacy on that night, claiming they only talked. Asked about the last time, she evaded. She professed an inability to recall when they had last been together before that day. Model. She began with an assertion of uncertainty. The details, she claimed, were a complete blank, a void in her memory. The investigator acknowledged this as a possibility. She explained her silence as a refusal to invent a story, to present a falsehood as truth. She insisted that recalling the specific timing of their last encounter was simply beyond her ability. The detective then pivoted, asking if their interactions had ever become aggressive. She claimed she couldn't even remember the man's age. She offered a vague assessment, stating he was never hostile, just neutral. However, every individual the detectives had spoken to painted a different picture. It was common knowledge that James and Shirley were involved, despite a 21-year age difference. They were described as inseparable, constantly together until the very end. Then, Shirley allegedly found a new man, and James became an obstacle. Her shoe size, she stated, varied between a 5.5 and a 6.5. The investigator decided to dispense with the preliminaries. He reminded her of a detail from their prior meeting: the search warrant executed on her white car. She acknowledged this, recalling that they had come and taken the vehicle. She had heard from someone that the car had been seized and later returned. He then revealed that forensic tests had been conducted on the vehicle, specifically looking for blood. He informed her that traces had been found inside the car. The samples were sent to the crime lab, he explained, and they came back as a match to Mr. Johnson. The detective then posed the inevitable question: how the victim's blood ended up in her car. Her reply was a flat denial. She had no idea. He pressed her, acknowledging the difficulty of the situation but insisting she had to be truthful. It was time, he said, for honesty and for bringing closure to the case. He invoked her professed feelings for Mr. Johnson as a reason to tell the truth now. He explained that what happened could not be ignored, and he would now state his belief. The detective looked at her and stated that she caused the death of Mr. Johnson. He told her that evidence from both the apartment and the car placed her at the scene with him. He once again asked for her honesty, to explain what happened and close this chapter. He asked if she would be willing to do that for him. She responded with a cryptic, uncertain phrase. He laid out the facts. Her presence at the death was proven by the blood inside the car she drove. He knew, he said, that she had gone into the bathroom to wash her hands afterward. He then added another detail. The shoes she wore that night were put into a bag. She offered only a quiet acknowledgement. He remarked that while it took time, the truth always surfaces. He offered to help the victim by finally telling the story. Before proceeding, she requested to speak with her father. She then demanded that he turn off all the recording devices. The detective refused, explaining that the recording had to remain on for procedural reasons. He began to outline how the Texas judicial system functioned. He clarified that he couldn't speak for the courts, only from his own experience with them. He defined the courts as either a judge or a jury that would hear the case. He explained that they would see her continued deception even after being presented with facts. They would also see, he suggested, if she was now willing to cooperate. He framed it as a choice: confess now or face the consequences of continued denial. She understood. The investigator pressed, questioning how she could live with the knowledge of her role in Mr. Johnson's death. He spoke of the grim nature of his work, the constant confrontation with death. The search for answers, he explained, was a duty he owed to the families. This case, he implied, was no different. He assured her his methods were not cruel. He never treated subjects with malice. Instead, he saw her as a person who was profoundly lost and in need of help. It was a strategic appeal, an offer of shared purpose to resolve the lingering crime. Finally, a concession. She agreed to tell the truth. The interrogation could proceed. She asked for a private conversation, but he insisted it remain on the record. Resigned, she surrendered to the process, her apology hanging in the air. She was terrified, convinced that telling the truth would be a death sentence. The fear of reprisal was palpable. She didn't know what they would do to her. He paused the recording for a moment, mentioning that others were trying to locate her. She mistook his reference, thinking he meant a defense attorney. He was not the prosecutor. He clarified his role: an investigator, a representative from the district attorney's office. She wondered aloud if speaking directly to the district attorney was a possibility. He acknowledged it might be, but only after she gave her statement. There was a cold logic behind the questions about her shoe size. Bloody prints were found at the scene. The prints were a direct match to shoes later found in a nearby dumpster. The shoes were her size and, crucially, carried her DNA. The case then went cold for 4 years. The key to unlocking the truth, the detective believed, was her father, who was about to face a devastating revelation. Her father was escorted into the room. The detective was methodical, informing the man that the entire exchange was being recorded. For the official record, he needed to formally identify the new arrival. He stated his full name for the record. His date of birth was 4/29/45. He confirmed he was the suspect's father. The investigator explained that his daughter had requested his presence for what she was about to say. The father agreed, unaware of what was coming. Then came the fractured confession of her crime. The investigator relayed the admission, explaining that the guilt had been consuming her for years. She confessed that the secret had been eating her alive. He framed the moment as an act of respect, allowing the confession to happen with her father present. He paused to check on the father, who was visibly in shock. To continue the formal statement, the detective asked the father to step outside for a moment. He was led from the room. The detective managed the people in the tense space, allowing for a brief, controlled visit. The interrogation prepared to resume. He noted how difficult this was for her, offering a paper towel as a small, impersonal comfort. It was all he had available. He waited for her to compose herself. Then he pushed for the narrative, asking for the details of that day so they wouldn't have to revisit it. The apology for the makeshift tissue underscored the grim, sterile reality of the room. He offered what sounded like an apology. It felt, he insisted, like the right thing. He wondered if they had ended his life, wanting the conclusion now. He was adamant, demanding they proceed with his fate. His gaze was a direct challenge to the investigator. The detective's voice lowered, asking the question that filled the room. Then, a pivot to the victim's wife. What was her fate? That line of inquiry was immediately shut down by the investigator. But when pressed for a reason, his memory became a void. The detective pushed back on the sudden amnesia. After a pause, he admitted the weapon was a knife. The knife, he stated, came from inside the victim's house. He was asked to describe the mechanics of the killing. The question was simple and direct. Did he stab the victim? He affirmed it, then was questioned about the weapon's disposal. He feigned ignorance about the object. As the topic shifted to his shoes, he was confronted with the fact they were found in a dumpster. An apology came, blaming a sinus infection for his confusion. The detective asked if he concealed them in a bag first. He claimed no memory, but the evidence spoke for itself. Despite the detective's plea for his story, he could recall nothing. The wall of amnesia remained absolute and impenetrable. He was asked if he recalled washing his hands in the bathroom. His denial was emphatic, a frantic insistence on his blank memory. He couldn't remember, and the detective feigned understanding. The investigator offered a tactical retreat, accepting his claim. The questioning then shifted to the victim's ATM card. He issued a flat denial about when the card was taken. The investigator demanded a specific timeline for the withdrawal. He claimed the victim was still alive when the card was given. He confirmed Mr. Johnson was alive when he received the card. The detective connected his return to the apartment with the murder. The critical moment was again shrouded in professed amnesia. Yet, he remembered the moments just before the man's death. She noted his anger, but he insisted it wasn't personal. His composure finally fractured, daring them to lock him away. The detective tried to reframe the interrogation as a necessary process. She reminded him these were unavoidable steps. She acknowledged the pain of reliving August 4, 2015. He stated plainly that he could not continue the interview. The refusal was repeated with an air of finality. The investigator made one last bid for his direct attention. She acknowledged his consistent claims of a memory lapse. She appealed to a higher purpose, providing closure for the family. When asked for the motive one last time, the answer was silence. She professed ignorance, a flat and simple denial. When pressed for a trigger, her story remained the same: a void, an absence of memory. The question of motive went unanswered. To this day, Shirley has offered no reason for killing James. She did not, however, reuse the self-defense claim from the 1998 murder. That option had been closed off by the detective, who secured her opinion of James early on. She had repeatedly painted James as a good man, describing him as kind and gentle. This portrayal made any claim of his violence impossible. Her memory, she insisted, was a blank. It became her constant refrain, a persistent, convenient amnesia. An investigator probed if the memory ever surfaced when she discussed Mr. Johnson's death with friends. The act felt alien to her, a memory she claimed was not her own, but implanted by him. Yet, a reluctant acceptance surfaced. She had to have been the one. This shift from denial to admission was immediately challenged. Why now? She claimed their accusation prompted it. but the detective corrected her. She had placed herself there. She confirmed her presence, recalling the confession made before her own father. With that admission came a plea to be locked away, the key thrown out for good. There was a pause, a moment of strategic silence. The detective sought clarity amid the shifting stories. Was this a recantation? He demanded her full attention, insisting on a clear statement before she left the room. It was a final opportunity for honesty, to ensure they were on the same page. The question was put to her plainly. Did she cause his death? He was not feeding her a story. He reminded her the narrative was entirely hers. He had provided nothing. He had only presented the cold, hard evidence collected from the scene. Only then, he noted, had she decided to confess to causing Mr. Johnson's death. This suggested that she did, in fact, recall something of what happened. He reminded her that what felt unhelpful now could play out very differently in a courtroom. He then prepared to reveal another piece of leverage. The report from Missouri was in his possession, explaining his earlier, probing questions. He knew the details of that past, what she told police back in 1998. It had all been a test of her honesty, a check on her willingness to be truthful. He then softened his tone, asking if she felt she had been treated fairly. He characterized their discussion as professional and cordial. This civility, he noted, extended to her father's presence. He did not operate on threats. Such methods, he explained, were ultimately counterproductive. He had been direct from the start, and she had agreed to help find who was responsible. Then came the confession, unprompted and clear. She was responsible for Pete's death. An apology followed, though the reason remained lost in the professed amnesia. The motive was a void, a darkness she claimed to carry. She was sorry, she said, to the family, and to her own family. Just a single word, sorry. She insisted there was no intent, no malice. As her thoughts began to fragment, the weight of the moment seemed to settle on her again. It was, she repeated, incredibly difficult to remember certain things, but the admission held. Yes, she did it. She affirmed it, a strange note of sincerity in her voice. Her tears, she claimed, were not from fear of prison, but from something else entirely, mortal. She stated the family needed closure and that she was sorry, asking them to forego a trial and proceed to sentencing. The officer responded by explaining that there was a formal process that had to be followed. She acknowledged his intent to help her while insisting that she was being truthful. He echoed her claim of honesty, but then challenged her to be truly honest, not merely to try. He understood, he said, but then proceeded to explain precisely how the system operated. The judicial process, he explained, must be allowed to run its course. There was a required procedure, a series of steps that had to be completed. He informed her that any decision could only be made after consulting with legal counsel chosen to represent her. Only then, if the district attorney's office presented an offer, could she decide whether to accept it. She then demanded to speak directly with the person in charge. He paused to clarify that the investigator outside was not the one who made those decisions. That man was not the prosecutor. He was an officer, like himself, working at the DA's direction. She interrupted, attempting to clarify which official she wanted to see. He affirmed he could bring Investigator Hall into the room for her to speak with if she so chose. She agreed immediately, voicing her consent. He remarked on his bad knees as he stood up. The detective then called for his colleague, Lance, to enter the interview room. He began to brief the investigator, noting for the record that the suspect wished to speak with him. The record shows that at 12:08 p.m., the investigator entered at the suspect's request to hear her statement. She immediately confirmed the investigator's affiliation with the district attorney. Without delay, she admitted to him that she knew she had done wrong. She claimed that her shame was so great she did not want to endure a trial. A desire to face no one, she said, was why she wanted to speak to the district attorney. The investigator confirmed that he could relay all of that information for her. He would pass her message along to him, a quiet, desperate invocation of a higher power. She confessed to having wanted to die, mentioning the electric chair as a potential end. But as the detective had told her earlier, that particular outcome was not their decision to make. He acknowledged her apparent emotional distress, but voiced doubts about the sincerity of her wish. In a stunning reversal, all the initial regret and the apparent desire for the electric chair have since vanished. As of this report's publishing, her position had changed dramatically. She has repeatedly filed appeals, now claiming she was coerced into confessing and was denied a fair trial. The only person harmed by these actions appears to be the one who cares for her most. her father. Yet, the detective had presented her with a twisted logic that her actions were, in fact, helping him. He posited that her father had long harbored suspicions about her involvement in a death back in '98. That terrible knowledge, the detective implied, must have been an unbearable weight. When the new investigation began in 2015, phone calls with her father had reopened those old wounds from '98. The detective then forced her to recall the look on her father's face just moments before. He was in a state of profound shock, a reaction she pointedly refused to witness by averting her eyes. That frozen look, he explained, was why he had asked her father to leave. He was watching his child confess. He reminded her that, despite everything, her father had been completely cooperative with them. The man had even been willing to drive her to the station himself, of her own free will. This day of reckoning was inevitable, the detective told her, though it should have happened sooner, by her own hand. She offered a weak protest, claiming she had wanted to confess so badly. She made excuses, claiming she had tried to make contact many times, but her phone had been lost or stolen. He explained that a lost cell phone containing the investigator's number was the reason for the long silence. Indeed, he could no longer find the device anywhere. The call, he admitted, would have been made much sooner had the phone not vanished. The investigator pointed out that any law enforcement agency could have connected them, but the suspect confessed to a pervasive distrust, only vaguely recalling the name Greg or Gary. The name was right there on the badge, yet a fog of suspicion had clouded his memory. He mentioned a strange code asking for the Black Ranger, a detail lost in the family's inner world. The investigator then shifted focus. He was asked if there was anything more to add about the investigation. There was only silence. He apologized, blaming the ringing in his ears on the crushing quiet of the room. It was a state of being caught between worlds, he claimed. The investigator then outlined the grim procedure. A warrant was being drafted for his arrest in the death of a Mr. Johnson. He was informed that he would be transported state by state. He would be booked, and the official investigation report would be prepared. In the morning, he would face a judge for what was known as an arraignment. The question was posed: had he ever been arrested in Texas before? Not for anything more than a traffic offense, he implied, before the investigator continued his explanation. At the arraignment, a judge would read him his statutory rights and determine the matter of bond. If a bond were set, he would be given the chance to post it. The investigator made it clear he would not speak ill of him, only report the objective facts. He stressed that his personal opinion was irrelevant, holding no weight in the case. His duty was to report the facts and findings of the investigation, nothing more. There would be no attempt to cast him in a negative light. The past was immutable. What had happened could not be undone by either of them, but their actions could shape the future. His words, his actions, were what mattered now. The investigator would document their conversation and present it. The suspect made a simple request: a cigarette. A search for one would be made, if any were available. The investigator clarified that smoking would not be permitted inside the building. If a cigarette was found, they would have to go outside. The suspect found the notion of asking for such a small comfort to be somehow disrespectful. It was a moment of dark, unexpected levity that the investigator acknowledged. But then the suspect had one final thing to say. He paused. There was a word of thanks. He expressed a profound and surprising gratitude for the investigator's character and for the system itself. He appreciated what they did, insisting he was not a fundamentally bad person. He claimed he never meant for it to happen, that he didn't know why he did it, couldn't remember the act. He acknowledged how often that same phrase is used by others, yet swore his own memory was a genuine blank. He couldn't explain the amnesia, only that it was real. He confessed to the deed itself, but the how and when were lost. He felt a strange, conflicting sense of relief, a quiet affirmation. He was consumed by sympathy and sorrow for everything, yet couldn't articulate the cause of his own actions. He insisted he could not explain it, that he simply did not know why. The investigator listened. The investigator acknowledged his gratitude for the work law enforcement does. The suspect repeated his relief that it was this particular investigator, seeing him as a good person. Her final conviction came in 2021. Life imprisonment in Texas for the murder of James Earl Johnson. An absence of remorse defines her actions, as she persistently files appeals, seeking a path back to the outside world. One can only hope the courts recall the tragic outcome of her previous taste of freedom. The devastation she wrought extended not only to the loved ones of James Earl Johnson, but to her own family, who had tried to prevent her descent. Thank you for joining this investigation. For further examination, one of the most unsettling cases from the archives is available here, along with one of the newest case files, presented right here. The tragic saga of Shirley Falcowski and James Earl Johnson serves as a haunting reminder that the secrets we bury never truly stay dead. They only grow heavier in the dark. This story is a visceral lesson in the shattering power of deception and the long reach of accountability. At the heart of this tragedy is the devastation of broken trust. When Shirley chose violence and later cloaked it in a convenient shroud of amnesia, she didn't just end a life, she fractured the souls of two families. To see a father, driven by unconditional love, unknowingly deliver his own child to justice is a reminder that our choices never belong to us alone. They ripple outward, staining the lives of those who believe in us most. True peace cannot be found in a needle, a bottle, or a lie. It is found in the courage to face our own reflections. This case screams a vital truth. Justice may be delayed by years or hidden by silence, but it is an inevitable force. Let us learn that remorse is not a legal tactic, it is a human necessity. May we choose the difficult path of honesty over the seductive ease of a secret, for a life built on a shadow will eventually be swallowed by the light.